Hey, welcome to Vice Squad. It's my series where I'm looking at a bunch of different woodworking vices from the past and trying to figure out if any of these old designs should be brought forward into the modern workshop. And you know, one of the big debates woodworkers have when it comes to vices is, well, should you use cast iron or should you make your own wooden vise? And that's all fine and everything, but wood, cast iron, these are old materials. We gotta get with the times. I mean, it's at least possible that the vise of your dreams is actually made out of plastic. Okay, so this is called the Meyer Vise. It's also called the Crit Vise. It is awfully weird looking, but let's not let that stop us. I mean, German planes are weird looking and they work. So the way this thing works is, okay, so this is like the main bracket, and it sits like this, and it has pins that drop into these different grooves, and that forms one part of the vise. Then the other part of the vise are these little eccentric cams. These also have little pins built in, and they drop in like this, and then you rotate the cam so that it pushes the work against this rubberized fence over here. So it's a surface mounting system, not a traditional vise that hangs off the side or the end of your bench. It is weird looking, but it's also, I mean, it seems well designed. It seems to me like this is something that could work. So I want to give it a try. Here's the problem. The vise doesn't work by itself. It needs a bench that's been more or less designed with this vise system in mind. You need to have a grid of 3/8" holes on 2" centers, more or less covering the whole bench. I do not have enough faith in this thing to take one of my benches and just fill the entire thing with holes, but I have a good workaround. I have this old piece of Formica countertop. Big surprise, I pulled it out of the trash, and I'm gonna set that on top of my big workbench and screw that down at the corners. Then I'm gonna lay out my grid of 2x2 squares. The big problem here is that I only have one straight edge and I don't have any 90-degree corners, so I have to reference everything off the same edge. That's a little bit of a pain, but I have a bunch of good squares, so I get that sorted out. Now I have the whole thing laid out, and now the challenge is I have to drill accurate holes straight up and down. Okay, so I've got my grid drawn out, but I drew it in pencil, and it's gonna rub off over time, so I wanna center punch all of my holes. Here's my punch, and here's what that looks like. And I have 168 of those to do, so I'll get back with you in just a couple minutes. Okay, now it's time to drill our holes, and the holes need to be really precisely on center for the jig to work, and they also need to be really, really plumb so that the pins won't bind and that they'll go in. Here's how we're gonna do that. I've made a little guide block here on the drill press so I know this hole is straight up and down, and here's what'll happen. I've got my drill bit, and I'm gonna feed that into the guide block first. I'm going to use the tip of the drill bit to find one of my center punch marks. That way I know I'm on center and the drill won't move around. I'll push the block down against it like this, and then I'll drill. Helps if you have the drill set to go forward instead of backwards. Hot tip. And that one actually broke through because the Formica's a little thinner right here, but I've also got a piece of tape that's going to keep me, hopefully, from going through and putting a bunch of holes into my bench. I am not going to drill 168 holes right now. I'm going to do enough to get this thing up and running, and then we'll give it a test before I spend the rest of the day drilling holes. This should be enough holes to get me started. I've got 3 rows of them in this little area. Should be enough for me to try this little piece of walnut here. I did not try this off camera, so I don't know what's gonna happen. Here's what you do. You take this fence portion right here, and you line that up with your holes, and then you can drop in these plastic pins, and then the fence is adjustable. You can move it like this to move it closer or further away from whatever you need. Because, you know, these cams, they only have a certain amount of travel. And then I think I can put it on the first set of holes. Then I'm going to take my piece of wood and put it right there. And then the cams are helpfully labeled L and R for left and right, and the instructions are really, really adamant about the left one needs to be on the left side and the right one needs to be on the right side. Okay? Now, here's the idea. I should be able to just push these cams. Well, you're supposed to push them together. I did it individually for a second there, and holy crap! That's amazing. Wow. Hold on. Wow, it doesn't even really want to move when I'm tapping it with a mallet. Okay, so here's my favorite vintage hand plane. Let's see. Oh, okay. Let me see how easy it is to take it out. Okay, that was easy. Let me put it back in. Wow. Okay, so right off the jump, I am impressed and a little bit shocked. I thought this was a stupid gimmick. I bought it for 20 bucks off eBay. I wasn't expecting much. That was excellent performance for planing a small piece of wood. And I work with a lot of small pieces because I make a lot of tools and stuff. So surprisingly, that was sort of great. But it's supposed to be able to do a bunch more stuff. So let me drill a whole bunch more holes and we'll try a few other things. Obviously, working with a little piece like that is easy. We need some more real-world scenarios to test this vise. An obvious thing is edge planing. So I grabbed a pretty small scrap to start with, and it handled the edge planing really well. The board was held securely, and I was able to take full-length strokes, just like with any other vise. Now, a challenge with any work-holding system is face planing and holding a board down for that. What I liked about the face planing for this vise is that the adjustment was very, very simple. I was able to move that big fence in a couple of notches, and then I tightened the cams and I was ready to go. I didn't move anything before I grabbed this board, but there's a lot of adjustability in this vise. And of course, this is still a pretty small scrap. We need to work with some larger pieces. So this one here, this is the widest piece of solid wood that I have in the shop. Still, piece of cake, very well held. And then I noticed I was going against the grain and I wanted to flip the board around. What I was pleased with here is the vise just releases really quickly. I flipped the board, tightened it up again. It was almost as quick as using a standard quick release vise. And then of course, edge planing, often you have to do very wide boards with that. So I just took that very wide board, it's about 13 inches wide, and I stood it up on edge. And you know, honestly not bad. You're not expecting miracles here because you're just pinching the very bottom of that board. So it's a narrow grip area, but it was still surprisingly stable. And if I had to joint a board like this, I think I could do it. Of course, it's great that we can handle those basic planing tasks. That's what you want out of a vise. But what about some more advanced stuff? What about planing end grain, for instance? So last week, I made a shooting board. There's a video and plans you can check out. It came out really well. But as I was using this setup, I was thinking, well, how could we use this as a shooting board without building a separate appliance? And so this is the only straight edge of my Formica. So I'm working over on this side. And I thought, well, if I put a piece of wood here, I screwed this piece of hardwood to that piece of Formica, and it's just under the edge, so my favorite shooting plane can just sit right there. And then I bet if I took this jaw of the vise, and if I put it there, it doesn't reach over far enough, but it has enough adjustment that if I bring it over there, it comes right up to the edge, but without hanging over. So I shouldn't nick it with the plane. So my idea here, and again, I haven't tried this off camera, my idea is that when I put the plane on this track here and put a piece of wood there, I should be able to shoot it square without a dedicated shooting board. I'm gonna press it up against that fence and bring in my plane. I mean, wow. So here's an end grain shaving. You can see that's pretty good. That's about what you're looking for. And then here's the piece. Everything's been evenly cut. Now we'll test it for square. Let's see here. Honestly, it's pretty good. I mean, I see how if you were making your own bench, you could just sort of build this in and the shooting board could be a part of the bench. It wouldn't need to be a separate thing. I think what you probably would do is you'd probably put a piece of wood here in front of this fence so that you could handle thicker pieces of wood. But there's nothing keeping this from being a shooting board. You can work end grain with this. That's nice, but what about joinery? Could I chop a mortise in this thing? Well, I've taken my little piece of walnut and I've laid out a mortise right here, and I'm gonna chop this to like 3/4 of an inch deep. Not my best work necessarily, and I'll admit the vise was a little bit of a letdown on this one. It didn't have quite the grip that you would really want for mortising. Obviously, most of the force is going straight down, so that's fine, but you know, to clear out the waste and as you're working deeper, you might want that chisel at a bit of an angle, and you've got some force going parallel to the jaws of the vise, and this vise is not good at holding against that. When I did those parallel hits, the vise loosened up and I had to retighten it 4 or 5 times while I was cutting the mortise. It wasn't a deal breaker, it was just a little bit frustrating. And you know, I did cut a mortise for it, so I'll give it a B- on this one. I think the more interesting question is, I've got this flat work holding set up. How could I use this to cut a tenon? Well, how about like this? What I've done here is made a little apron that just goes down the side of my bench. You could have one that goes the whole way like I have on my joiner's bench. And then on this little scrap of apron, I've installed the crit vise, and now it's vertical. I've also laid out a tenon on the end of this piece of scrap wood, and here's what I think is gonna work. I can put this here, make sure it's sticking up far enough, and then I can tighten these cams like that, and that seems like a pretty good hold. So let me get a tenon saw and see if I can cut this tenon. Okay, well that worked. Basically, so you can see I've cut a tenon here. It's not very good. Some of that might be user error. There's definitely some problems with this. When you have the piece low down in the vise, which you want for good grip, there's a chance that you might hit the cam with the saw, so that takes away some of the angle I would usually use to stay accurate. I had to saw more straight. I also really like to put it in the vise on an angle so I can go down that corner and ride 2 lines at the same time. That's a great trick for doing a good tenon. The other big problem I notice with this is when you mount it sideways this way, one of the things you get is sawdust falling in between the cam lock and the work surface. And that sawdust is basically, it's like a lubricant. And so this then gets looser and looser, and it's harder to tighten because now you've got this, this dry powder on the cam. So, you know, this is kind of like the mortise. You could make it work. It's just not ideal. Of course, one of the main things this vise system is advertised for is clamping, and that might be one of its greatest strengths, especially when you think about clamping up sort of large panels of wood. So I have some boards here. They're a little mismatched. They're not really for a glue up, but they'll help you get the idea. This is a pretty long distance here. It's over 1.5 feet. And I want a large bearing surface on this side, so I already have 2 cam clamps, but the kit comes with 2 more, so you could get cams all the way along one side of this to give a whole lot of force and good distribution. I'll put an extra one right here. And then on this side, of course, it'd be useful to have 2 of these, which, you know, you can do, or I'm just gonna put a piece of wood in there, and that's going to help spread that clamping pressure. And if I wanted to glue this up then, I would just need to tighten up And that is actually a really reasonable amount of tension. This might be one of the best things you could do with this system. If you were making windows, panels, a bunch of cabinet doors, you might want to build some sort of a clamping table, even something exactly like what I have here that you could put on top of your bench, and then you could just put pieces in, clamp them, pull them out, put them in, clamp them, pull them out. This is a pretty efficient way of moving things. It's very easy to size, and it's quick to get stuff in and out. So it could be efficient that way. Okay, so full disclosure, this video, it didn't start out as a serious video. I ordered a bunch of parts for the next real installment of Vice Squad, and I thought, oh, well, I'm waiting for that stuff to come in. Let me review this little joke right here. But what's weird is this is actually not a joke. It's kind of great, honestly. I'm a little bit blown away by how well it works. Now, I'm not saying that this little thing and its cams, this is not going to replace a quick-release cast iron vise or a big homemade leg vise or a twin screw or something. No, those things are much better vices. It's a gimmick. But it's a gimmick that actually works. I found it surprisingly effective for planing, drilling, clamping, and it's acceptable for mortising and sawing. Oh, it was pretty good at shooting, actually. I think there's some circumstances where this would be a great addition to your shop. One of them would be if you're just starting out. The vise can be a big hurdle. It took me a long time to find my first good woodworking vise. If you were at a garage sale or a flea market and you found one of these for 15 or 20 bucks, that's a killer way to get going. You saw me do a bunch of regular woodworking operations with it, and it went fine. So it's a good way to get started. Another thing I think you could do with this, make it part of some sort of jig or fixture. So if you had like a clamping table that you used to batch out the same part over and over again, or some sort of router jig or drilling jig, you could build this into it and it would be flexible and work really well. The other thing that I really want to bring up is the incredible lightness of the whole thing. I mean, these parts don't weigh anything. And, I'm kind of the guy who specializes in woodworkers who have some sort of limitation. No time, no money, no space. And some of my viewers tell me that they don't have a place to work. They have a box of tools and they sort of open it up on the front porch or on the front lawn or a parking lot and do their woodwork. If you have some sort of portable workbench situation, throw one of these into your toolkit for sure. It makes sense. It does a bunch of things, and it doesn't weigh anything. So, I wouldn't tell anybody to run out and go looking for one of these. They're not made anymore. You can find them on eBay, and you can find them at garage sales and stuff like that. Don't pay more than like 20 bucks. But, if you do find one, pick it up, especially if it's inexpensive. You really don't know what you might end up doing with it. I'm probably going to do something with this in my shop. It's sort of too good to just put on a shelf. And while we're talking about vices and stuff, this whole thing suggests that maybe surface clamping is something we don't think about enough, or I just don't think about enough, because there are a bunch of surface clamping options out there. Veritas makes this great little thing called a Wonder Dog. That's great. And there's all sorts of cam-operated and lever-operated surface clamps that do more or less what this does. They cost a little bit more, but they're also more robust. A lot of them are made out of metal. I will link to some of those down in the description. And if you're looking for creative work holding, maybe what you want to do is integrate surface holding into your workbench. I might give that some more thought, especially because it could replace some of those huge clamps that a lot of us have a hard time finding, or they're too expensive. A surface clamping rig might fix all that stuff. And if you're interested in work holding and workbenches in general, I've done a bunch of videos on benches, how to make your own bench, how to build your own vices inexpensively. I will link to a bunch of that stuff down in the description. You can check that out. And if you're new to this channel, you might notice that I'm not reading any ads or I'm not thanking my sponsors. And the reason for that is that this channel is almost totally supported by my patrons on Patreon, which means I have no sponsors, I never take any free stuff, and I don't try to sell you stuff unless it's like plans that I come out with. There's no big company that I have to please when I make this stuff. The people I have to please are my viewers. And my patrons are my most valued viewers because they make all this stuff happen. And in return, they get early access to all my videos, they get to be part of an incredible supportive discussion forum that's growing all the time, and they get free access to every single one of my plans. So if you'd like to be one of the people who help make these videos happen, go on over to patreon.com/RexKruger and check out all the rewards I have for the people who make my work possible. And I never end a video without thanking my viewers, because they are also really helping me be here. Thanks so much for watching.